Hello, poultry keepers. Glad you could join us this evening. We have got a good show tonight, and I know there's a lot of interest because I've seen a lot of comments about it. We're going to be talking tonight about making your own feed, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. I know I'm looking forward to hear what my compatriots here have to share with you guys. Uh, it's going to be a fun show. Um, Karen, I know, makes her own feed, and I give her a good bit of credit for that. I don't know that I would have had the courage to go out on my own and do that. So salutes to you, Karen. And she's got a little video that she put together showing you the steps and some of the processes. But Karen, what encouraged you to take that step and go out and make your own feed? What was your
Jeff,
motivation?
Jeff. um, yeah, just all the years, multiple, I mean, 4 years of attending Jeff's talking speeches, presentations, repeatedly telling me that this stuff I was buying was not formulated for hatching, breeding from the birds. So and then so just one, not really being able to buy what I wanted to buy, and then two, the second part I think that really pushed me over the edge was when he started teaching on temperature variance, that
Mm,
feeding different levels of protein and energy depending on how warm it was, because I was having issues with, once it got over 85 during the day, like my birds just basically stopped laying. So I was sometimes, my laying cycle was sometimes ending in mid-May. And there's no way to get a good lay rate if your birds stop then all the way through molt. Do
yes,
you know what I mean? Like
yes.
there's just no, so being able to change that was just to see if it worked. It was honestly my so should I stop now or you want me to keep talking?
Well, no, I was just going to say that I know that if I went to my feed dealer and I asked for some of the feeds, breeder ration I can occasionally find, but if I go much past starter, and most of them are starter growers and layer, and occasionally breeder, I get met with blank stares when I ask for it. They just don't have a clue. It's just not available here in Florida, at
Yeah.
least in my neck of the woods. So,
Well, and Jeff calls it being an extreme control freak, but I call it, there are lots of custom mills out there, right? You can take recipes that you have and take them to somebody who will make them for you. And I have two or three within 4 hours of here that will even make down as little as 500 pounds. Do you mean? So that is a huge, I'm lucky that I have that ability. But I have, I feel like just over and over and over again, you hear of people that start getting their custom feed made, either something the mill makes or something, and then it's not exactly as advertised, either by mistake or by the ingredients they use. You know what I mean? Not really, because you can make a custom ration with all the right words, and it can be made, in my opinion, of some pretty terrible ingredients that are very similar to big box feeds. Do you know what I
hmm
mean? Without, so I just, if I was going to go the route of not just walking into the store and buying it, if I wasn't going to go the easy route, then I wanted to go the where I actually had the complete control over it versus, and I may back up someday and go halfway again, but for now it's working. So,
I know the one thing that kind of always discouraged me, but now that I've gotten to know you and have seen your process, the process of making a feed was very intimidating for me, and not only the process, but trying to find all the ingredients um, just was just totally foreign to me. I just couldn't.
and that was the absolute worst part.
Sourcing everything. Are you getting it all local?
um, yes. Well, I don't know. Yes. I have to, I have three places. It takes three stores that I go to
Okay.
for to get everything. So the hardest thing for me was the soybean meal,
Okay.
because in Jeff's book, it's very specific about what kind of soybean meal I do not want. So that was the hardest thing to find, was somebody who offered that.
Does it not?
Um,
Does it have to be non-GMO then to find the expeller pressed?
Not for me. I
Okay.
mean, I found a mill that makes it, that does their own, that makes it on premises, but they do.
Right.
I think they do organic too, but they do conventional grains in
Okay.
it. Um,
Alyssa, explain for the audience what are you talking about when you say expeller pressed?
Right. So there are different ways to get the oil out of soybean. So you'll have So you'll have like a whole roasted soybean, or you could have soybean meal, which is going to be higher in protein, lower in oil because oil's been pressed out of it. And they can get that out different ways. One, it could be mechanically forced out, which is expeller pressed. I'm going to say that's a least efficient way of getting oil out. And by what I mean by that is you're not going to get as much oil out as if you were going to get it through solvent extracted, which is where they use hexane to get the oil out of soybeans. So a couple of different ways. So one of the biggest differences that expeller pressed soybean meal is usually going to run around 44% protein. Solvent extracted would be closer to 48%. And then the higher protein is going to have lower energy. Lower protein is going to have higher energy. And that just comes down to how well the oil has been taken out of the soybean.
Gotcha. Karen, how long did it take you to be able to find all your ingredients? What was the process you had to go through there?
Well, I said this on Facebook today. When Jeff says, "I'll make you whatever ration you want," his first question is always, "What do you got? What do you have available for me to make feed out of?" And being a city girl, I'm like, I don't know what I have. So I mean, it's a matter of going to I went to the feed store and looked. I'm like, what kind of it? And they were like, "Oh, we can order you anything you want," which was not helpful.
No, too many options.
And I ended up honestly looking at Jeff's book, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to find the ingredients on this list. That was doable for me. You know what I mean? So if you look at the example rations and say, okay, here's the list of 9 things I need. Can I find all these things? And I could find everything except, and I can find the soybean meal. I just couldn't find the expeller pressed. But I almost started with the hexane extracted because is that not what was in my feed before?
Probably. So the hexane extracted, and Jeff, please add to this as you see fit. Hexane extracted, it's a less natural way. So you're going to have a chemical in there. However, hexane is expensive from what I understand. So they're going to do everything they can to get as much out as possible. But again, it's a less natural way of pressing the oil out. And I don't know the side effects of hexane or anything along those lines. So.
Yeah, I mean, the remaining hexane is probably negligible, but there has to be some. There's no way they're going to get it all. Maybe they get 99%. It just seems weird to me that you're, something very similar to what you use to degrease your oven or your stove or whatever is what they're using. It's a harsh chemical. It's a chemical degreaser, right? So it just didn't feel the best to me. The other thing is it doesn't get, so a solvent extracted soybean meal doesn't go through the same heating process. And so the trypsin inhibitor, and we're getting way off into the weeds here, but the urease or the trypsin inhibitor doesn't get broke down quite as well as it does in expelled or roasted. Okay. So.
And that was the other option Jeff told me. When I came back to him and said, I can't find soybeans, he's like, well, try to find whole roasted soybeans. And so those actually were something I could find, but only in the organic fashion. So,
right.
But that would have, drastically increased my price, but it was doable. You know what I mean? That sort of leads into the whole, if I was going to go with whole anything, that I needed to get a mill of some sort, because you need to be able to make your ingredients into a size that the birds can eat it, right? You can't give them whole soybeans. You can't give them whole corn. Well,
Some people do.
yeah. Well, let's talk about that. What size are we looking for here?
Yeah.
You're looking for something about 1/8 of an inch wide and 1/4 of an inch long. That's the ideal particle size. So it's equal to what we call a whole grain of wheat or a wheat berry, right? That's really the ideal size, for poultry pretty much of all age. People think that baby chicks can't handle that. They're wrong. I mean, you put some whole wheat in front of a baby chick, they're all on it, man. They know what to do with it. Now they got to have grit to process it, but they can pick up a particle size, 1/8 of an inch wide and 1/4 inch long, and swallow it. So no problems whatsoever.
Jeff, here's something for you, and we were talking about it before we came on air. But what is reasonable expectation or goals should people be having who are interested in making their own feed? I know you were talking about fertility, hatchability, and things like that, and you shared a percentage with us. But share that with the audience if you would.
Well, so when I met Karen, years ago as a breeder, and I don't want to make her sound old, but about a decade ago when I met Karen, I listened to all the breeders that were in the room at that time, and there was like, boy, I wish my fertility was better. I wish my hatchability was better. So that was the puzzle that I had to work on. So I went back and I started doing some research and looking at things and figuring out what helps with fertility, hatchability, chick vigor, the whole bit. So my goal with working with the breeders was to try and achieve 80% lay rate, like 80% production, because that's a good production number. And the birds should be able to do that. I don't care what kind of bird it is. There's some outside that realm, I get it, but 80% production, 80% fertility, 80% hatchability. Some breeds do that anyway. They do it very well. They're going to do it on their own. But there's other breeds that really struggle with that. But that was the goal that I set for myself in, helping breeders like Karen or whoever, chose to step up and work harder at being breeders. So.
Very good. Thank you. Karen did a short 3.5-minute video of her feed making process. And I know that's one thing that I have seen questions posed about, what is actually involved and from start to finish. Karen, you want to show them that video and then maybe we can open it up for questions and kind of go from there.
Sure. This is Karen from Peak Poultry, and on the coldest day of the year so far in North Carolina, at a good 22 degrees now at a little bit after noon, Jeff said I had to record a video on making my own feed. I've been mixing my own feed for about 2 years now. It's not very complicated. You can choose to make it complicated, so I do that a little bit, but I'll show you what we do. All right, here's my ingredient storage. So that's Amy. Hi, Amy. So I got barrels. This isn't the main storage, but I got alfalfa and linseed meal, which is not in the feed I'm making now. That's more for the chicks. I use the Fertrell fish meal, soybean meal. I use full fat soybean meal. Cracked corn. I buy cracked corn. I do not have a mill to crack things myself. Which is okay for me since I pellet, but if you don't, you probably need to do that. Calcium carbonate is what I use still. Some Redmond conditioner, the Fertrell Poultry NutriBalancer, and whole barley is what's in this recipe I'm doing today. I'm going to get started, weigh this out, and I'll get back to you. All right, we're going to get it turned on and get our stuff added. So I'm going to put the soybean meal in first. then I'm gonna add the other ingredients. So everything's in there but the corn. Then I'm going to add some molasses as slowly as my patience will allow. So just dip that in there. The slower you can add it, the less chunks you have. It just helps sort of bind the fines to the bigger chunks that they're going to eat. More important if you weren't going to pellet it, but I still put it in. Now I'm going to mix that for a little bit while I measure out my corn. All right, so for this recipe I need 34.65 pounds of corn. All right, we're going to add the last of the corn, and then we'll let it finish mixing. So, all right. Okay, now on to the loud part. We've got it out of the mixer, brought it over here to the pellet mill, and so you just add it little by little to the pellet mill, and then it comes out as pellets. It's warm when it comes out, so it's best to let it cool off a little bit before you add it to your storage bin. So we take the trays and put them over here to cool off under the fan. And they cool off a little bit. I just take those tubs and take them back to my new toy, because my birds are no longer on my place. So I just put them back in the tubs, and I take them over and then put them in the storage containers over where the birds are.
Awesome.
Karen, how often are you making feed?
Sometimes I make it every 3 days. Sometimes I make a lot and I go 2 weeks. So
Gotcha.
really how much can I get made, and then how similar is the temperature? Because
Okay.
when I'm, but it bounces all around the place. So ideally I like to make it once a week. That's
Okay.
But so all right. What now?
Let's pop this question up here. We got a question. Jeff, when's the latest time they can feed their chickens? What's your recommendation on that?
I really like 1 hour before sunset. So that seems to be the opportune time. That's when I had chickens in the backyard sitting there observing them, their heaviest feeding period was about 1 hour before sunset. So that's when they wanted to eat the most. The other thing is you're out of the heat of the day, so you're not creating heat stress by feeding them early in the morning, and they have all night to digest it. They like to go to bed on a full stomach or a full gizzard or crop or whatever you want to call it, and I feel you get better utilization out of it. In fact, a lot of the folks that I've been working with that feed later in the day, they actually see improvements in health, production, the whole bit. So they're a lot happier with feeding and late in the afternoon.
Gotcha. Karen also put together an equipment list for those of you who may be considering making your own feed, and she also put together a little spreadsheet. And Karen, why don't you share with them the equipment list? It's not involved. It's not complicated. It's fairly simple and straightforward.
Yep. Do I have to say it, or can I just put it up?
Buckets, and more buckets. I feel like you can never have enough bucket.
You can't.
That one was for Rip down there at the bottom because he was all excited about buckets last time. But so you need a place to store. A lot of these are the same things you need for feed, no matter how you're doing it. But you're going to need a place to store the ingredients before you mix them together. So they can all just stay in their bags if you're buying it that way, or you can get just some way to store the ingredients first. And then you're going to need a mill or a grinder or some way to take those ingredients into an edible form that utilizes it best. And I think, honestly, that whole crumble mash pellet issue is what stops a lot of people from thinking they can mix their own feed. Like, first, you have to tell yourself that your birds will eat a mash, right?
Oh, okay.
In order to make your own feed. Like, so I think that the mash, they eat that better if you have a big pellet size and you're not getting powder. But I mean, even people getting custom feed sometimes are feeding their birds powder.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, because it's not being made big enough. And so for me, so a mill to make it small enough so that you can buy whole grains and make them, that's ideal, right? They'll stay freshest the longest if you can
Yeah.
buy whole grains and crack them yourself right before you mix it. You need a scale of some sort so you can make a recipe correctly, not just a 1, 2, count to 7, and then some way to mix it together, and then some place to store it afterwards. And again, that's probably the same way that you store your food now. And you're going to need buckets to go between all of those systems, in my opinion. So that's all.
Yeah, just a point to add to that is the whole grains, if stored properly, right? In a cool, dry place and in a container with an airtight lid, you can store whole grains for. I've got people that have stored them for up to 2 years. So, I mean, and look, honestly, they found some ancient grains in the pyramids, some years back that were 2,000 years old. And those grains came out and they sprouted them and they grew the plant, right? So just if they're stored correctly at the right humidity levels and so on, those grains are going to last years. So, you can buy well in advance if you want to, so you don't have to get them pre-processed. And Karen, do you got a picture of that grinder link? Or
Yeah.
I keep calling it a grinder, but
Well, it is a good.
it's actually a feed mill. So, here you can grind your own feed. And one of the watchers, Carol Wilson, this is what she uses. She makes her own feed. She feeds a mash. Her birds, it's not, and they're doing great. I mean, she just ordered her pellet mill, but she's been feeding mash feed. And that hand knob on the front of that allows you to adjust the particle size. So when it's coming through, you can adjust the coarseness or the fineness to what you feel is appropriate for your birds. Yeah, I mean,
And that's the way to get the freshest, much fresher than buying your stuff.
Yeah, and you can smell it when you're processing grain, your corn or your roasted soybeans or whatever. The smell is, I mean, you almost want to sit there with a bowl and a bottle of milk and have it. I'm serious. Milling feed is very pleasurable. It's hard work, but the smell is awesome. And I mean, your birds, they're going to respond to fresher feed. I mean, you make fresh feed and go out there, they can smell it and they're going to be all over it.
All right, here's a question. Is mash wet or is it a dry mix?
It's dry, and and there's powder, and this really is a function of training your birds to clean up, right? It's kind of like training our children to eat their vegetables, right? So you just gotta, you don't overfeed. Don't get frustrated with what's left behind. You don't refeed them until it's down to that 5% residual. And you don't get excited about the powder in the bottom of the trough. But you know what? I've been preaching that for 20 years. Nobody listens to me. They still get all wigged out about the powder. And it's like, it's not a big deal. The birds are going to be fine.
Even if, and this is I'm just going to devil's advocate. What if all the powder that's left is all the NutriBalancer and they ate everything but the NutriBalancer?
We just, we tend to make ourselves believe that all the fish meal, all the NutriBalancer, all the calcium is left at the bottom. You know what? 27 years now. I've been doing 26 and a half years. I've been doing this. And I go to, hundreds, if not thousands of chicken farms, and I see powder left in the bottom of the trough. And those birds are still performing outstandingly well, right? It's just something we get stuck in our head. The chicken don't care. There's no health issues. The performance is there. Their growth and development's there. We feel like we're wasting something. And what I tell people to do is at the end of the week, you tip your feeder up, put the powder in a bucket, add a little bit of moisture to it, just to get it to crumb together and put it back in there. They'll clean it right up, right? And they didn't miss a thing.
All right, we have questions. All right, so Armando, my question is whole grains fed versus using a hammer grinder mill. What is best for their digestive system?
Some of the grains are just honestly too big. Like whole corn is hard on their digestive tract. It makes them work harder than they need to work to digest it, but they can do it. They're not gonna eat whole soybeans or whole roasted soybeans. So they do the best with the small grains: wheat, barley, oats, rye, triticale. That's the particle size that they're looking for. I mean, they're going to eat the corn, but it's going to sit in the crop for a long time. It's going to sit in the gizzard for a long time. And, it just takes a long time for them to get it broke down and utilized correctly.
All right. Craig has a question. How much dust does the milling make?
In that mill, when I saw Carol using it, it wasn't much dust at all. It really wasn't. So.
A lot of dust is made in the mixing. That's what, especially with alfalfa meal, I feel like that's a messy process.
Yeah. And isn't it the older the grain is, the dustier it is when you mill it?
Yeah. So the longer it is from harvest, the drier it gets, and the drier it gets, the more it wants to explode. So, there's going to be more dust in older grains. And here we are in the summertime, right ahead of new harvest coming this fall, September, October, et cetera. And so, now the grains you would buy now, there's going to be more powder than there would be, with new grains at a higher moisture. So they harvest the grains at about 15.5% moisture. And then as they get older, like now, those same grains are down around 12.5 or 13% moisture, if that. So with that reduced moisture, they're going to be more powdery when you process them.
All right. So Beverly uses a roller mill to make rolled mixed grains with poultry NutriBalancer mixed in. When there's a powder at the bottom, I do exactly what Jeff said. I add water and they think it's an amazing treat. So
yeah, it ain't rocket science. So they like wet feed. So, once or twice a week, just kind of dump it to the end or, dump it out, add a little water to it.
Well, and I want to, because I pellet my feed, I do not recommend you pellet your feed. No problem with it, but you don't have to. But I do want to show, I still have powder with pelleting. Do you know what I mean? So on the one side, that's free feeding a group of birds. There's 8 birds on that side. There's 8 birds on the other side. And when I give them 8 scoops, they finish it all. When I just free feed them every day, there's much more left over. So, I mean, I feel it's the same training thing, right? If they've got more feed, why bother? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so,
what do you do with that?
Honestly,
we can pretend like I didn't ask.
With the portion one, there's basically very little there. So I just put more feed in. With the other one, I'll go a few days, and then honestly, I have a bowl off to the side that I dump it into, and I get it wet. So same thing.
Okay.
I use a separate container that I actually leave out to be rained on. Is actually what I do.
Gotcha.
Since it rains almost every day here. Yeah.
So those feeders just hook onto the wood, right?
Yeah.
So could you just lift one side and push all the fines to the one end? Have you ever tried doing that?
Yeah, I just don't know that they would then eat them.
They don't eat as much.
You know what I mean? Like because if it, I mean, they would if I got them wet, but if I just pushed them off to the other side,
Right.
eventually it would just
Yeah.
be a lot on the one side. And
I've seen broilers eat a lot of like the fines if you push it to the one end, but I don't know necessarily for y'all's bird or for your birds.
all right. So Armando, how long does it take for a whole grain to be milled and lose its nutrients?
And nobody really knows the answer to that, Armando. Alyssa and I did our own little study here, and we got some whole corn and we got some cracked corn the day they cracked it and had it analyzed. And then we kept some back and we tested it again in 30 days. And there was a negligible, there was hardly any difference.
Yeah,
So, if you email me, I'll share those results with you. Now that was corn. The thing is, the starches oxidize and we can't measure that. So once you expose the internal starches of the grain and air gets to them, they get stale, just like bread does. If you leave bread sitting on the counter in your kitchen, it's going to get stale. I try and tell everybody to, not feed more, feed that's older than 30 days. That's not realistic for most people. They go to the store, they want to buy a couple months worth. The people at the feed mill or the feed store, they've learned how this game goes. So they offer you a discount if you get 10 bags or more, right? So you want to get all the discounts you can get. But
All right, Jeff, what's your maximum? Everyone likes to
60 days is really my maximum. 30 is my honest maximum. Compromising, I would say 60 days is a maximum for a processed grain.
I think time of year and location are also going to be relevant. Like if
It
you're
is.
in Florida in the summer when it's hot and humid, your feed probably isn't going to last near as long. In the winter,
Yep.
you've got more wiggle room because it's cooler. But then humidity plays into that as well.
Cool. Karen, I know we've got some more questions coming in, but you did a spreadsheet that to me was really enlightening. Why don't you take just a minute and share that with the viewers, because I think they'll find your data very interesting.
I have to ask him. I have like 13 tabs on my spreadsheet. What data are you looking for?
You and I were talking about how much does it cost you to manufacture your food.
Okay. There we go. I will bring that one up in then. All right. So
And honestly, I didn't know you had
Spreadsheet.
so many spreadsheets.
they're all on the same spreadsheet. They're just tabs. Yeah. Let's see. All right. So, and we actually have a question on this too. So Craig says, are you doing this to make what you consider to be a superior feed, or is it to save money? And Jeff has driven into my head, and I believe this was true years ago, that I do not save any money by making my own feed. I 100% did it to have better feed and be able to control how often, what I was feeding at different times of year. But with the recent increase in feed prices, I actually am. I think the ingredient price just has not quite shot up as fast as the prepared price. So and just to go through them, say them out loud. So my chick starter runs me $23.29 per 50 pounds. My grower mix, which is for me after 4 weeks, I switched to grower, and that's at $16.71. After 8 weeks, the cockerels and the pullets are separated, and the cockerel feed is $16.75. The pullet developer feed is $15.72. So the cockerels stay on that until they either pass away. No, I'm seeing until processing, or until they join a breeding flock, or depending on time of year. So we won't get into all that. So my layer feed, my breeding layer, like if I'm actually hatching from them, that's back up more expensive at $17.81, and my regular layer. So if I'm not hatching, they're just going into laying for over the winter or whatever, is at $14.51. And then I do also have a breeder holder to feed when they're not actually laying. So that's at $14.38. So all of those, the cheapest feed on the other side is Tractor Supply name brand feed. The cheapest feed there was the layer Nutrina 16 feed pellets was $20.49 on sale this week. So
Yeah.
all of my formula, and well, that's not true. My chick starter is less. That's the most comparable. And for me, the chick starter, the price in that is it's in the finely ground corn, because the regular corn is $11 a 50 pounds, but the finely ground corn that the babies can eat is much more expensive. So that and the fish meal are what kicks the price of that one up.
And then looking at your breeder layer, you've got higher vitamin levels. And then are you adding fish meal and synthetic amino acids, or
Nope, just
fish meal?
Well, I don't see. I just follow the recipes. I don't.
The recipe doesn't have any added lysine, methionine, or threonine in it.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and part of and just again, because I'm pellet, it's the alfalfa meal in the chick starter. So my chick starter has alfalfa meal so they can eat it. When I go to anything that I'm pelleting, I use alfalfa pellets, which are much cheaper than the meal. Because my alfalfa pellets are big, like horses, right? So a chicken probably isn't ingesting them. So, but when I put it in my mix and then pellet everything, it just gets pelleted inside of everything else. So
okay. And you don't grind it first because you can't, because you don't have a mill.
Well, I mean, it's too much work. I don't.
It's too much work. You're pelleting it.
Well, but pelleting, you pour it in and it magically comes into pellets. So I mean, so basically it grinds everything to a powder. The pellet mill grinds everything to a powder and when it stuffs it down into the dye.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So it just does my grounding for me.
Yeah.
It's not a separate process.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. No, that's
there you go. Good job, Rip. You answered Nate's question.
Good deal.
Yeah.
And we've talked about feed recipes and for this and for that. We actually have several feed recipes on the Poultry Keepers 360 group in the file section, and I just made a link that will show up as a featured post, be the first thing you see when you go into the group. If you want to look at some of these feed recipes, we've got them there, and if you don't see what you want, let us know, and we'll see what we can do for you. We'll accommodate you.
And they're called example rations. It's a very fancy name, but they're very similar to the rations in your book, right, Jeff? I mean, pretty close.
They are, and they're exactly what they say. They're examples, right? They're not one size fits all for everybody. So don't, somebody's gonna, they're gonna read that and they're gonna look at that and say, oh, I can't get this and I can't get. Look, they're examples, folks, right? So do your homework, find what you have access to. Reach out to Alyssa or I will help you source ingredients if you're having a hard time, because we work all over the U.S. and so we know where things are. Sometimes we can help people find things, but they're examples, okay? They're not set in stone. Like you've got to do these and only these. So
we do need certain components.
You do.
So, you definitely need some sort of a protein source. So protein sources are usually going to come from, Karen's using soybean meal. You'll need roasted soybeans. Raw soybeans will not work because of the trypsin inhibitors in there. Basically, it's going to affect your protein digestion. So it needs to be heat treated. Fish meal is a good supplement. Those are some examples that are typically readily available. I would bring up peas, but pea prices are pretty crazy right now. And then you are going to need energy sources. So that's going to be in the form of corn, wheat, barley, and oats can help as well. And then a mineral pack.
And if you go into this, even if you're looking for a feed mill, if you go in trying to source ingredients, that is how I found out what a huge difference there can be in a custom feed mill. Do you know what I mean? Like some places, every one of those ingredients have a better quality option and a lower quality option, right? I mean, you can be feeding catfish meal, you can be feeding. There's lots of different a range, and so go ahead, Jeff.
Well, so look, those store-bought feeds, look at them. If it says processed grain byproduct on it, okay? So the feeds that won't tell you exactly what's in them, right? You got grain products, you got protein products, and you got processed grain byproducts. If it says processed grain byproducts, that means it has wheat middlings, corn distillers, something in there that is not necessarily good for the bird, okay? To make a pellet, you got to use wheat middlings. Now, Karen doesn't because she's doing a cold press, flat plate. And the only thing that does help her pellet hold together, one of the things is the Redmond conditioner. So that's a clay particle. It helps with the binding, makes the pellet a little bit harder, but not store pellet hard, right? And we don't want it to be store pellet hard. We just want it to look pretty until the chicken eats it. That's it, right?
Yes,
Hold together till the chicken eats it. And it's only got to go 2 miles. She makes it, drives it down the road. So
Not a whole lot of handling going on there to break it up.
No. Those other feeds are being made in a large mill somewhere. They're traveling hundreds of miles across the road. Going across the road is really hard on a pellet. So they've got to use a substantial amount of wheat middlings in there to make a good hard pellet, make it bind, hold together. And wheat mids are just like hollow nutrition. There's nothing really there, right? There's no benefit to the chicken whatsoever. But it looks good on paper and it's cheap, right? And that's the key word there. It is cheap. So it's what they use to hold their prices down and, improve their profit margin. That's how the game gets played. So
Rip wanted to bring this up, so I'm leaving it up there for so long. But how different the prices are. Like in Florida, your prices are higher than North Carolina.
It's horrible down here because we have to have everything shipped in to Florida. We don't grow any grains or anything here, so every single ingredient has to come to us, either as an individual ingredient or as in a ready-made feed.
But go up to Iowa, and there are feed ingredients that are a little cheaper there locally.
Yes.
So makes a big difference. Let's see. Nate wants to know, do y'all grow your own feed grains or buying the source grains? And I think he knows that I'm buying, but there are, Jeff, you've got some people growing their own.
You can. If you have the ground to do it, there's no reason why you can't grow your own corn, wheat, barley, oats, etc. Depends on where you live, right? I don't know where Nate's at, and some things grow better in some regions than others do. If I was going to grow my own grains for my chickens, though, I would choose the small grains. Most of them grow through the winter when we have more moisture, so they're not as drought, sensitive. B, you don't have to process them, right? You can feed them just like you harvest them. But you got to figure out how to harvest them, whereas corn, you can go pick the ears off and shell them and, do your own thing. But it's coming up with the proteins. You're still going to end up buying the heat treated soybean somewhere, whether it's soybean meal, expeller, extruded, or, full fat roasted. You're probably going to, I don't know how you can grow the beans and then you got to go through the process of heat treating them.
In the Appa Grit, there's an advertisement for a soybean roaster every
yeah.
You can roast them yourself.
Do they have small scale roasters?
Yeah, Fred Clark has the smallest one, that we saw at APRA, and he's the one advertising. It's called the Red Jacket, and it's electric, but it's still like close to $8,000. So it's hard to. We didn't talk about the equipment list that Karen had up there, and we can talk about it. But if you added a roaster to it, you're adding a significant,
You're committed to this.
I think if I was small scale, I'd almost put them on cookie sheets and put them in my oven and set the thing for like 300 for 30 minutes and call it good. But
That's
that's
going to be
just
my
me.
next question.
Huh?
Yeah, you have to
That'd
have
be my
3
next question is,
chickens.
can you do that? But does it need to be
Yeah.
flat?
No, it doesn't have to be flat, but the beans have to. So if you're going to put them in a large bowl in the oven, then you have to go in there and stir them. So because some of the beans are going to
Oh,
heat differently than the
in the
other,
middle.
so you need a way to agitate them and keep them rotating.
hmm
Whereas if I did them on cookie sheets, there's no competition for heat. They're going to heat more uniformly.
hmm
But you can, what can you get on a cookie sheet? 3 pounds of soybeans. So
Yeah.
you're going to be forever trying to do them in an oven. But
So this kind of, well, I'm just going to say it anyhow because it's not super relevant right now. But like making your own feed, it gives you a lot of control and it's awesome. But you also need to have the time to do it. So,
yeah, Karen had 90 minutes for 270 pounds. So
yeah.
But that wasn't the price. That wasn't the time. That was just mixing it and pelleting it. That wasn't the time driving to go pick up the feed. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
going to the 3 different stores. Oh, I gotta go get. I'm all out of alfalfa meal. I gotta go. You know what I mean? But those. I mean, you run out of feed all the time too. I mean, you have to go
Yeah.
get your feed unless it's delivered to you.
Mhm.
So, but yes, finding a consistent supply, and this is here, Marie's going to talk about that. So, the break in supply chains can be a bit unsettling. Our local feed store is somewhat inconsistent in supplies of certain grains. It may be available this week and then not again for a month, even in common grains. Corn, oats, etc., are not readily available.
That does make things a little stressful.
And yeah, I'd say you need to have more than one place. Like I said, the only thing I can only get in one place is the soybean meal. But it's like I have a backup place for everything else. It may be more expensive there. It may be, you know what I mean? Like, but you're just having a second place in your mind of maybe
Right.
further away or less convenient. But
Don't
you
clear
also can substitute what it is, right? I mean, one thing I don't do that I should is change up my grains. Like Jeff is telling me, you really should throw some Milo in there sometimes and not corn all the time. Switch to wheat and not always barley. You know what I mean? Or just oats. You know what I mean? Like get right. Wouldn't
a
it
little
be
bit
better?
of grain variety.
actually, the more diversity you have, the healthier the birds are actually going to be. So while it's a pain, it's a nuisance to make a feed that has 15 ingredients in it. If you turn the bird loose, right, in an area to go find whatever, it's not going to eat all one thing. It's going to have a variety. But, a little oats, a little wheat, a little barley, a little corn, a little Milo, right? All of that seems to, they all have their own specific enzyme factor and nutritional breakdown. So they're all going to add something, to the digestive tract of the bird. But, corn and soybeans are easy. So that's what they get, corn and soybeans.
Because I'm lazy. Yeah.
Well, and they're
I
pretty
didn't say
available.
that, and
too.
that has nothing to do with it. Really, all you can get for the most part is corn and soybeans. I mean, it would take extra effort for you to find Milo and find wheat and find, wheat's in a shortage right now, because of the drought out west. Wheat's short, and there's not a lot of it around. So, right now, if you had to buy wheat, you'd be like, oh man, that's crazy, right? It's more expensive than corn by a long shot. And
Well, and that's where I think my luck of finding a place that buys locally from the farmers to make their own feed, and they make feed of all types, but they're not a huge feed mill. They're a tiny little place, but they sell a lot of feed. I mean, and they have to get the ingredients for themselves. You know what I mean? Like if they want to keep selling feed, they have to. So I'm sure that they're struggling, but so far they've been because, and they're willing to sell it to me. So I feel like one of these days I'm going to call and they're like, nope, we need all that for ourselves. Thank you. Do you know what I mean? But like, I'm not, I'm like I said, I'm buying it from a place that normally wants to mix it together and sell it to me. But can we talk a little bit, Jeff? Because when I first started, the one thing you mentioned that I still may find attractive as I get older is
right.
I'm not talking about you now. No, I'm kidding. Is a base mix where I like, so right now I'm feeding 7 different feeds, and now this year we absolutely have to get the molt feed in there. So that's going to be 8 varieties of feed that
Yeah.
I'm making. Like, is there, I perhaps at some time will release control and get the custom feed
No,
mill
not
to make
you.
me, no, release partial control
All
and
right.
get the custom feed mill to make me a base mix that I then
Mhm.
parlay into individual mixes. So go.
So actually, why don't you just make your own base mix? So I have a formula for a 36% protein pellet, and that would have your NutriBalancer, your fish meal, your calcium, right? It has all your powdery stuff that nobody likes in there. Then at different proportions, right? Like you can make your chick feed by only adding this much corn, this much barley, right? And then as they get older, the protein pellet part comes down and the whole or cracked grains goes up. Works great. So then your protein's already made. So you can just sit there, and make a whole bunch of protein pellets, and then all you need is your mixer. Add your grains and your protein pellet, and you're good to go. And as long as we don't make the protein pellet too hard, when you put it in the mixer, it'll crumble for the chicks, right? It'll get down to the right size, so it's not too big for them. They're not going to choke on it, right? But yeah, we can do that. Just let me know when you're ready.
Jeff,
And
is that what we're seeing when we see pictures of feed that has grains in there with pellets?
Yeah. If you're seeing them on like Poultry Breeder Nutrition in different places,
Mhm.
where I'm hanging out, that's exactly what you're seeing. So we're putting all the powders and the proteins into a pellet, right? And the idea was we could ship that protein pellet all over the country, then people could mix it with their own local grains, right? And the concept never caught on. It was just, I don't know, it just went right over people's heads. And, or they didn't see the value in it, right? When you can go down to Tractor Supply and buy a bag of feed for $20, it's like, hey, why would I do, any of this, right?
Mhm.
So, but
Gotcha. We've got another question on ingredients before we bounce off to another subject here. Um, any thoughts on camelina grain or camelina meal for poultry feed?
yeah, I saw that one come through a little while ago, and I just started and said to bring it, make sure we got it up. But so camelina is grown in limited regions, Pacific Northwest, Montana, some parts of Canada. Um, Camelina as the grain, I have not fed. It has a really high fat content to it, but the seed is so small, I don't know that the birds are actually going to digest it. I think a large percentage of it is going to pass straight through the digestive tract and end up in the manure. We do use the meal quite a bit in poultry feeds. However, the USDA has limited us to no more than 10% of the diet on camelina meal. So you can't use it as your sole source of protein. And I don't think you would want to. It's got a big word, glucosinolates, I believe it is. Anyway, it's part of the mustard seed family, and it has high glucosinolates, and you can get some adverse, effects from overfeeding it. We don't really know what that number is, but we do know that there are potential side effects to overfeeding it. But look, I've been using camelina meal and chicken feeds for well over a decade, and it works fine as long as you do it correctly.
Very good. And Karen, there's one here for you since you pellet your feed. Uh, one of our Facebook friends is wanting to know what is the price range for pellet mills?
oh, that's a can of worms. So the cheapest ones I see are right about $1,200. You can buy them on eBay. You can buy them off the boat from China. I believe actually all pellet mills are made in China. I don't know any made in the United States or in Canada. But there's a huge variety in horsepower and the strength of them. So I would say the cheapest is 1,000 ish. maybe 1,200, and then I think mine goes for about 3,000. But it can handle everything without. Basically, the weaker it is, the finer your ingredients need to be. So if you want to mill everything into a powder, I am sure that it would be able to handle it with the less expensive one, or so right in there, cheaper than a roaster.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and that's current prices. Everything was cheaper 2 years ago, in case you couldn't guess.
Very good.
I think Pellet Masters, if you go to Pellet Masters, I think you can still get one for like $15.95, $14.95, $15.95, 5-inch, 5 horsepower. And I think for most people, that's going to work just fine. I mean, I don't see why you'd need anything bigger than that, but it's still, you're looking at $1,600. Is that shipping included? I don't remember, Karen.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and certain ones, they keep a lot of parts in stock for them, so it's not hard. Like if you need to replace the die plate or the rollers or something like that, it's not a huge issue. Like you can call the guys up. The customer service is outstanding. They're not hard to work with. They'll answer your questions, and they keep certain ones they keep in stock. So you can get those replacement parts without shipping them all the way from China right now. And that's a good thing. But they are Chinese made. They're the least expensive ones I've seen. The only one I know of in the U.S., Karen, is Buzzkirk, Buskirk. Price is about 4 times as much, but they do make a very similar pellet mill to what you can find at Pellet Masters. I believe they're out of Ohio or Indiana. So
That's cool.
yeah.
Cool. Pam Harlow wants to know, Jeff, is that base mix you were just talking about available from Fertrell? Or where
It's
would
not. It's not, and here's why. So, Fertrell works with a lot of feed mills across the country, and if we start selling feed, we're competing with a lot of our customers, and that's not ethical. You can get the 36 base mix from several of the feed mills, that Fertrell works with. Resaca Sun out of Georgia, it's available, is my understanding. You can get it through Kraut Creek. You can get it in Pennsylvania. So if you reach out to us, I can put you in contact with the mill closest to you that, you should be able to source that 36 pellet.
I've been tempted by that pellet, everybody.
You should be.
I'm tempted by that pellet. Not making it myself, though, because he sent me the ingredient list and I didn't recognize half the things on there. So if I thought finding ingredients that I'd heard of before was difficult, I don't know how to find things with chemically sounding names. So, but all right. What do we got? Let's see. I know there's at least one more. All right. So same thing. Would it ruin the ingredients if you don't have a place to store them that's climate controlled?
Not necessarily. If climate control would be awesome, because then it would likely last a little bit longer. But as long as it's out of the weather, the cooler the better, and covered. If you can keep rodents away, that's going to help you too. So I don't know if I would say ruin it, but I think it'd be better if you could keep it. But I don't know how realistic that is.
For 18 months of making my own feed, my feed storage was my minivan whose transmission was blown. So
awesome.
But same thing. In the summer, I would go get feed every other week because I couldn't keep it very long. Whereas in the winter, I could put 2 months worth of ingredients in my dead minivan. So
Yeah, look, the farms are keeping them in large metal silos out in the direct sunlight. So the inside of those metal bins or silos are going to get hot. You just don't want them to get wet, and you don't want a lot of air in them. But otherwise, you can keep them for a long time. It's nice if you can keep them in a garage or out of the sunlight, so the temperature is more uniform. Heating and cooling is going to cause the grains to sweat, and that condensation gathering on the outside can cause some molding issues if the grain moisture is a little high when you put it away. So that's why we want to keep it out of the sun. Try and keep the temperature a little bit more stable by keeping it in a shaded place.
We got. All right. So feed formula from Jeff. My feed formula from Jeff includes oils. I'm about to embark on my pelleting adventure with a pelletizer and wondered about the heat created during the pelleting process and how the ingredients might be affected. I had lots of questions about this for Jeff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the oil isn't going to affect anything. Adding the oil and going through the pelletizer isn't going to affect the nutrients. Like Karen said, they're going to come out warm. So I would recommend getting a digital thermometer, and we want to get the temperature below 150, 160 as quickly as we can. So you're probably going to want really good ventilation and a way to cool them. In a commercial environment, when the pellet drops out of the pellet mill, it goes into what they call a conditioner. And all that is a high volume of, outside or cooler air being blown up through that pellet to cool them off, drive off any excess moisture, and so on. So at our scale, putting them in the tubs, those mortar mixing tubs that Karen showed in her video, and then, getting some fans to blow across the top of that as it's pelleting, in my opinion, works great. So I don't think we have to get any more technical, but the oils and the nutrients are going to be okay. I'm not worried about them coming through the pelleting process.
Karen, do you mix your pellets as they're cooling? Like you walk by and just run your hand through them, or do you just kind of let them be?
I mix them when I fill them too high in my tubs.
Okay, gotcha.
So I've at first didn't have very many tubs, so I was filling them pretty deep. So then every time I went and moved another tub, I would stir the one before it.
Right.
But now I have enough tubs, so I just put them all shallow and empty them more often.
That makes sense.
But yeah. But let's see. So Carrie has a big barn, but it's not well ventilated and it gets hot, but it should stay dry, I would think. So.
Yeah, it's going to be fine. It's the temperature fluctuation. So indoors, the temperature difference between nighttime, daytime is not going to be as great as if it was outside. So that's what we're trying to minimize, is the temperature fluctuation. It can get hot. It's just, depending on where you live, you can have nights in the 40s and you can have days in the 80s. And that 40-degree temperature variation on a daily basis is causing the grains to sweat. Inside the barn, I would think that that's more of probably get down to 60 at night and maybe 80 during the day or a little warmer, but you're going to have less temperature variation is kind of what we're trying to achieve, less temperature variation.
And let me just throw these up there just because I had it ready. So a lot of people use this Harbor Freight mixer. This is the current price today in North Carolina. So that one's a 3.5 cubic feet. I went with the Lowe's one only because it was 4 cubic feet and it didn't have that bar down the middle. I can stick something totally up underneath this one, as opposed to having to only set it in front of it for that one. But
I see what you're saying.
It may be that, I don't know. I don't know how tall that is. I've not stood in front of it, but this one has a better angle. So I can put 70 pounds in mine at a time. So that's the size of a batch that I now make. Without putting, if I want to do 100, I can, but I have to put the front two wheels up on bricks. So, which was fine, except for that it led me to never clean up around it because, I couldn't possibly get it off the bricks. So, so by leaving it on the ground and making 70 pounds, now I clean up a little bit more often.
So Karen, just to clarify, I believe that your paddles inside the mixer are solid on the Lowe's or the Cobalt.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you go back to the Harbor Freight, right? If you can grab that picture again real quick. If you look at the inside on the Harbor Freight, the Harbor Freight.
Yeah.
So the inside, those paddles have holes in them. So it does not mix quite as well as the cobalt does. It still works,
Okay.
but if it was me, I would find something to put along, those paddles to make it lift higher and drop more central, because it's losing a lot of the grains about half or 2/3 of the way up. So you have to let it mix a little bit longer to get a thorough mix on the Harbor Freight versus the cobalt. Just sorry,
No, that's good to know.
Yeah, yeah. But either one works fine. I see both of them in action. Both of them work great.
All right, let's see. Okay, we're gonna get it. So there is a semi-local farmer who promotes peanut-based feeds. Thoughts? Not necessarily to purchase from him, but to use in making feed.
Peanuts, I mean, if it's peanuts on their own, they could be a decent protein source possibly, but they're going to be high in fat. You run the risk of something called aflatoxins, which is a mycotoxin that could cause health issues. And lastly, they're low in lysine, which is an essential amino acid for growth, development, and light rate. So I would probably ask a few questions about what is in the peanut-based feed and if they get those peanuts tested for aflatoxins regularly. I think those are the first couple things I would ask. I don't know what Jeff, what is a whole peanut's protein, like without the oil being processed?
Yeah, it's really not that high. It's only in the 24, 25 range.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't have the oil pressed out of it to some degree, then it's really hard to make. You get way over energy really quick using peanuts, whole peanuts, or peanuts that have not had the oil removed from them. So peanuts can be very problematic, and you're going to be limited to about 10% of the diet at most. Really oily. It smells great. I mean, it really does smell great, but really, really high fat content and hard to work with. And yeah, the lysine can really become an issue because peanuts, for whatever reason, are much lower in lysine than other protein sources.
I mean, if you want us to look at the peanut-based feed, we can give you more information.
All right, and then I think to finish us off, we'll talk about illness here, Rip. Is that okay with you?
That's fine.
All
Go
right.
for it.
Who wants to tell us how to prevent or treat sauerkraut?
I get this question once a year, and every year I have to look up how to treat it. So, Jeff, unless y'all will give me time to Google it.
I'm not really sure. I mean, I like Alyssa, I only get it like once or twice a year. People ask me. I just heard a really great remedy the other night. Somebody said load them up with water, actually force feed the water by holding their head and kind of fill the crop up with water, leave it in there for a minute or so, and then lift the bird upside down and let it regurgitate, let that water drain out.
You just upset everybody.
Is that what you're doing?
What?
You're rinsing it out.
Yeah, you're basically rinsing it out because it's got a bacteria infection of the crop, right? So it's just out of balance. And then follow that up with some plain yogurt. Give the bird roughly a teaspoon or two of plain yogurt, and repeat daily. If you have to, but like Marie just said, there's not really a true remedy. I've heard people opening it up with a scalpel and rinsing it out and sewing it back up again and stuff like that.
There's a YouTube video on that from a vet very recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about apple cider vinegar?
So much out of there.
Have you read that?
Yeah, my treatment would be apple cider vinegar. Like I would prepare some water, with like 4 times the normal amount, like 4 ounces per gallon kind of apple cider vinegar, and let that be their water for a few days. And I think you're going to get just as good. I think the success rate is equal to anything else we just talked about. Okay, so
I want to say
very, very tough to get rid of.
I want to say anything that involves making them repeatedly regurgitate. That's something you're doing when that bird's going to die anyway. Like
Yeah.
that's not
Like shake
that's
them
not
up a
a
little bit.
that's not a solution. I mean, there's a lot of bad things that can happen from doing that. So,
I just said I
So-
heard somebody recommend
Yeah.
it, and
Well,
so
no, I mean, but that's something you're doing when like, oh, this like I'm gonna lose this bird, so then therefore,
Yeah.
I can.
What were you gonna say, Rip?
Oh,
Raise.
I was just going to say I've been raising chickens for eons and a lot of different breeds and waterfowl and turkeys and the whole nine. I have never had one of my birds come down with sauerkraut.
Oh.
And,
Then we
and it's
did-
something I see a lot of posted on Facebook and the internet and in a lot of groups. You
Well,
would think
could
it
it-
was one of the most common things in the world, but for me, it never was.
Yeah. Could it be people are mistaking sauerkraut for something else, or is it a smell? What's the distinct
I mean,
signs of
it's
it?
possible that it's mistaken ID. The Lord knows you can hang around some of these Facebook groups and they're,
Mhm.
oh,
and they asked a little bit about Lloyd asked about preventing it, and I think that's almost more of it, right? So the sour crop is for some reason that this crop is not emptying as it should, right? So it could be slightly blocked. It can be, I mean, so that can be the foraging, giving giant grasses
So-
to eat. And
Without
in the
grip.
spring of the year, depending on where you live, when birds have been trapped all winter, and all of a sudden you let them loose, right? And they're out there, and I've seen it. Hens got blades, huge blades of grass sticking out of their beaks, and they're just so they can't get it processed. They can't get it through that crop, and it causes an impaction and blocks it. So then you get what is referred to as pendulous crop, where it's oversized and it's plugged up. And then if the crop can't discharge correctly, you're just leading it to sour crop, right? It's going to be right behind it, so to speak. So there is a mild fermentation going on in the crop, but if it can't pass after so many hours, then it's a problem. What are you laughing about, Rip?
somebody just texted me a
Oh, okay.
joke here.
yeah,
It's
so,
really kind of funny. He said, I just flew back from a ravioli convention. Boy, are these arms sore.
quit reading your phone. We're boring you
I'm
that
sorry. I
much.
said it could have been something else.
So Marie says that she's been having this problem. So gave hay over the winter without adequate grit. So she's lost 6 birds to it over the last 6 months.
Wow.
So it is a yeast infection.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you just start breeding, and then you just cull all those birds. Health problem, check.
Solved by Gary Johnson.
Well, what's funny, Karen, is people that have lots of birds to choose from say exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
But people that are just getting started in breeding and only have a dozen, and they spend a lot of money to get select breeds and get good breeding stock, they do everything they can to preserve those birds. So, yeah.
I'm going to be in that group. Rip took me down to 7 hens. I have
What?
7 Rhode Island red hens.
Are you serious?
Yep.
How are you going to
She'd do it.
survive
I
with
was in
only
shock.
7 hens?
I got lots of babies. That's how. But it's
See the future.
it's terrifying. Yeah, it's terrifying. So, but all right.
Did you get rid of all the overweight ones?
No.
No. She couldn't do it.
No.
Well, you would have to. That implies that there are birds there that are not overweight. That
Oh, okay. So you didn't have any in the lower weight selection group, huh?
I had already culled for weight. That was my major culling. So I mean, I had the lowest of and those were the birds I need crop seed. Were the ones I culled. So I mean, I had already done it for weight, but that was still a factor. But Rip's helping me out. He's making me try it. I only promised him
mold 'em this
1
year?
year. No, I'm teasing.
You're going to mold them this year so those problems will go away?
Yep. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
But I did feel he did help me feel the abdomens. I'm like, is this what it's supposed to feel like? It's empty in there. He's like, yep. Oh, okay.
I feel hungry.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
What's the matter?
Oh, Lori just posted, and, so we should put it up there because I
Lori.
want to answer it.
Oh,
No. Feeding mash does not contribute to sour crop. Not any way, shape, or form. It does not. 100% guaranteed.
And we didn't get to this, but Jeff is a firm believer that feeding mash makes the birds healthier because they use their gizzard and it versus pellets and crumbles where that organ is just in there for show. Yeah.
well, and the biggest part of feeding mash is you need to feed grit, which also helps the gizzard.
Yeah.
So feeding mash without feeding grit grit's essentially their teeth and it helps them grind it down. So, I mean, you should always feed grit. Grit.
I'm going to show my age here, but I can remember a time when mash was all you could get. There were no crumbles. There were no pellets available here.
Yeah.
And then we
And
got
it really
spoiled.
wasn't that long ago, Rip, because I can remember that too.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Shall we leave?
All right.
Oh, what are we
Any
doing
last
next
questions?
time?
I don't know. What are we doing next time?
Rip knows.
He's
Well, I
the
got to
keeper
find
of
it
the
first.
information.
I'll put it up at the
Oh,
top.
thank you. Next time, 2 weeks from tonight, on May the 31st, 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be talking about how to use and apply the standard. It's something that just frightens most people to death, and you really shouldn't let it scare you. There's some basic steps that you can go through, and we're going to introduce you to those steps and the concepts behind the standard and what makes it all work together for your advantage.
And we're going to focus on the APA, the American Poultry Association standard, but most other standards are very similar, are they not?
Yes.
So, all right.
Thank you, everybody.
Folks, thanks for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a good one.
Thanks.
I got to play the thing. Sorry.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation by Poultry Keepers 360. All rights are reserved. This production has been made possible in part through the generous support of the Fur Trail Company, manufacturers of gardening and livestock products that are better naturally.